Oh, I can't stand it. Every time I see Sherry's face, I feel sick. Oh dear, that's terrible. Sherry, please pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you? I couldn't help but sigh at the malicious grins on mother-in-law and sister-in-law's faces. Feeling all my efforts had been in vain, I replied weakly, "All right, I'll leave." My name is Sherry. I live with my husband, Alan, in his family home. His father passed away, and since his mother has mobility issues, I knew we'd been living with her when we decided to get married. Before Alan and I got married, his mother was genuinely kind. She was always calm, smiling, and whenever I helped her, she'd always say, "Thank you." I thought living with such a mother-in-law would be manageable. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Once Alan and I got married and started living together, her true colors began to show. First, she stopped thanking me for anything I did. I wasn't doing chores just to hear her gratitude, so I didn't mind at first. But gradually, instead of thanks, she began to complain. "You're so slow. Alan will be home soon, and you haven't cleaned the bath or finished dinner. What's going on?" "Well, I'm sorry, but Alan just happened to come home early today. I've been doing the chores as usual." "If your husband comes home early, you should work faster. You don't care enough about Alan." "That's not true." "I don't want to hear your excuses. Ah, poor Alan. Why did he marry someone like you?" There was no trace left of the kind woman I had known before our marriage. Still, I tried my best to meet her expectations. I could keep going because of Alan's support. In front of Alan, she pretended to be the ideal mother-in-law and was kind to me. But I talked to Alan about how she behaved when he wasn't around. Alan believed me and said, "I'll talk to Mom," and he did. After being scolded by Alan, she'd behave for a few days. But then she'd go back to her old ways. This cycle continued until one day she received a phone call. It was probably sister-in-law Betty, loudly bad-mouthing me so I could hear. Betty, who's married and currently pregnant with her first child, is just like her mother. She changes her attitude depending on the person and, frankly, has a bad personality. She once said, "I never thought my brother would marry someone as wonderful as you." But now, she says, "You're always causing trouble for Mom. You're so useless." Mother-in-law and Betty have a weekly phone call where they bond over criticizing me. I was getting numb to it all, but after hanging up, Mother-in-law cheerfully called out to me and dropped a bombshell. Betty is getting a divorce. Her husband was a plain guy. Anyway, so it's for the best. Once she comes back for the birth, she'll stay here. You might not be needed anymore, Sherry. What? Oh, I can't wait. Make sure you prepare a feast for the day Betty comes home. I felt devastated. Until now, it had been mother-in-law versus me. With Betty moving in, it would be mother-in-law and Betty against me. I was already worn down by mother-in-law's constant complaints. The thought of another person adding to that was unbearable. Trying not to let mother-in-law see, I shed silent tears while vacuuming. I couldn't take this life anymore. A few days later, Betty arrived. Heavily pregnant, she was in her 9th month. I greeted her with a "hello." Immediately, she complained, "At least offer to take my bags." After taking her luggage to the room she'd been staying in, I heard her loud voice from the living room. "Sherry really does have a plain face, doesn't she?" As I prepared tea in the kitchen, Betty exclaimed, "Oh, I can't stand it. Just looking at Sherry makes me feel sick." Next to her, mother-in-law, laughing with a face just like Betty's, exaggeratedly said, "Oh dear, that's terrible. Sherry, pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you?" Betty laughed mockingly. I had done my best for mother-in-law, but it seemed all for nothing. Feeling empty, I sighed and replied weakly, "All right, I'll leave." I had anticipated this outcome from the moment I heard Betty was returning here. I had always known that a day would come when I'd leave this house in anger or sadness. I quickly grabbed my already packed bags, headed to the entrance, and picked up my car keys. Perhaps not expecting me to actually leave, mother-in-law called out from behind, "Oh, Sherry, are you really leaving? That's fine, but make sure you divorce Alan. He deserves someone much better." "I think that's for Alan to decide. Thank you for everything," I replied calmly and left the house. I called my parents, who warmly told me to come home. They were furious when I told them about mother-in-law and Betty's comments. "You don't need to go back to that house," they assured me, and for the first time in a while, I genuinely smiled. That evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Alan stood there. "Welcome home, Alan." "Thanks. Living with your parents will be a bit nerve-wracking, huh?" "Don't worry, you'll get used to it quickly. I guarantee it." As I greeted Alan with a smile and invited him in, he first apologized to my parents. I had told them how supportive Alan had always been, so they felt bad about his apology. Instead, they thanked him for trying to protect me and warmly welcomed him, saying, "Feel free to live here as you wish." Why did Alan fit in so well with my parents? It was because when I found out Betty was moving back after her divorce, I had proposed a divorce to Alan. I told him, "I'm already struggling with mother-in-law, and I can't handle Betty on top of that." And I cried, saying, "Even if it means divorcing, I want to leave that house." Alan was shocked, but immediately apologized, saying he hadn't realized how much I was suffering. He didn't want a divorce and had negotiated with my parents that if things got too bad, he'd move in with me at my parents' house. It seems that Alan plans to live in my parents' house for a while and then buy a house somewhere else. I was overjoyed when Alan came to my parents' house. I was happy that he chose me over mother-in-law and Betty. My mother prepared a feast to celebrate our arrival. As we enjoyed our meal and relaxed, my phone rang. It was mother-in-law. When I answered with a simple "hello," I heard her panicked voice. "Sherry, Alan hasn't come home yet. It's already late. Do you know where he is? I've tried calling him, but he's not answering. I'm worried something's happened." "Oh, Alan's right here. It seems he's blocked your number." As I spoke to Alan beside me, I heard mother-in-law's confused voice on the other end. Alan casually said, "Yeah, I've blocked your number." I relayed this to mother-in-law. "What do you mean? Is Alan with you?" "Yes, we're married after all." "Why, send Alan back immediately. Didn't you say you'd divorce him?" "Alan doesn't want a divorce, and neither do I. This is a matter between a husband and wife, not something for mother-in-law to dictate." I responded calmly, and suddenly mother-in-law burst into tears. "Why? Why?" she sobbed. Betty, seemingly unable to watch mother-in-law any longer, took the phone and said, "So you've stolen my brother? You're the worst!" "I haven't stolen anyone. Alan and I are married." "You might have a plain face, but you're so audacious. One day my brother will see the truth. and you'll regret it." Suddenly, the call ended, so I filled Ellen in on the conversation. Both of us, in disbelief, blocked mother-in-law's number. I also got Betty's number from Ellen and blocked it. With ties severed from mother-in-law and Betty, Ellen and I began searching for a new home. After visiting various properties, we found our dream home and decided to move out of my parents' house. We expressed our gratitude to my parents, who had let us stay for several months. They told us, "You can always come back," warming our hearts. One day, after settling into our new home and enjoying peaceful days, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Considering we had just moved, I thought it might be a service provider and answered. To my surprise, an angry voice shouted, "Finally, you pick up?" Confused, I asked, "Who's this?" "You've forgotten your sister-in-law?" I realized it was Betty. "Oh, Betty, how did you get this number?" I was sure I had blocked her number. She apparently changed her number when she got a new phone. I thought I'd have to block this one too when Betty suddenly said, "Come back right now. I just had a baby and the house is a mess. Mom doesn't do anything." Well, mother-in-law has a bad leg, so it's understandable to some extent, right? "That's no excuse. I'm struggling postpartum and she's using her leg pain to avoid chores." From Betty's words, it was clear she and mother-in-law weren't getting along. Neither mother-in-law nor Betty want to do housework, so it's only natural that they push each other. But that wasn't my concern. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I have no plans to return." "Why not? You haven't divorced Ellen, right? We're family. We should help each other." "It's funny you consider me family now." I chuckled and Betty shouted in frustration. But I wasn't fazed. I wouldn't have to see her face again. "When you see me, you feel sick because of my plain face. I'm truly sorry. If I came back to help, you'd just feel worse. Mother-in-law also didn't want to live with me. It's okay if you don't consider me family." "I might not have lived with you, but I never badmouthed you like Mom did." "I know you and mother-in-law would talk about me on the phone. Mother-in-law would purposely put it on speaker so I could hear. I know everything you said about me." I had heard all their phone conversations where they'd gossip about me. Betty seemed to be searching for an excuse. But I told her I wasn't coming back and hung up. I immediately blocked Betty's new number and resumed tidying up. That evening, a tired-looking Ellen came home and said, "Betty called me today. She changed her number." It seems Betty had called Ellen in tears. The relationship between mother-in-law and Betty was at its worst, with constant fights whenever they met. They argued over household chores, even throwing objects at each other. When Ellen, concerned about the newborn, asked about the child, Betty broke down crying. Shockingly, Betty's child had been taken away by her ex-husband. He had pleaded with Betty, saying he desperately wanted to see the child. In response, Betty had retorted, "What do you want seeing the child for? You're just a nuisance." Hearing this, her ex-husband declared he couldn't trust Betty with the child and took the baby away. In a fit of anger, Betty had said, "Then you raise the child." Now, regretting her words, she is embroiled in a custody battle. Mother-in-law's leg condition seems to have worsened. She's been advised to live in a wheelchair, but there is no way Betty would care for her. Mother-in-law manages with a cane at home, but the day she'll need to move to a facility she despises seems imminent. Betty had apparently sought Ellen's help, but their predicament was a result of their own actions. Ellen reportedly told her, "If you had treated Sherry right, you wouldn't be in this mess," before hanging up. Of course, he then blocked her number. No matter how unreasonable they are, they're still family to Alan. I worried that Alan might be hurt because of me, but he reassured me with a bright smile, saying, "You are my top priority, so it's okay. Besides, I'll be a father soon, too." Smiling at Alan's words, I gently caressed my still growing belly, replying, "That's right. For the sake of our unborn child, it's best to sever ties with mother-in-law and Betty. That's our decision as future parents. We have no intention of informing mother-in-law and Betty about our child. Alan, myself, and my parents want to shower this child with all the love we can offer."